Today is January 5th, 2021. I'm here with Sara Stewart. Sara is a writer, a poet, and longtime friend of mine. It's been 10 years now, huh, Sara?
It has. And I think I can't remember the last time we saw each other. I feel like it's probably been 4 years, like right after we graduated college,
I think so. I, I can't remember either, and it was a while
right?
before that too.
Yeah.
What have you been up to since college?
Um, I would say the simplest thing is that I've just been traveling. Like my last year of college, my parents left Aliso Viejo, so like out of consequence, I've kind of just been like running around. Like I've done spurts in California. I lived in LA for a little bit after college. And then I went abroad a few times. And I just kind of like was roaming. I've lived in 6 states in the last 6 years.
Wow. How
Yeah.
has the roaming been?
I mean, it's been fun. I've loved it. It's been exhausting. I think 2 years ago in 2018, I actually had a job. I had a job in 2017 for 9 months that I was living and working on the road, and I was going to a different city either every like 2 to 6 weeks. And after that, I was really exhausted. And well, after that, I actually went abroad again and traveled and went to 3 countries. But again, I was really exhausted. So then I moved to San Francisco and told myself I was going to stay put for a year. And then I stayed there for 2 years. So that was kind of a nice transition from roaming. But then, COVID happened. So that kind of escalated or ignited another move.
Okay. What were you doing every weekend? What was the reason you were traveling?
For my job or just in general?
Oh, what did you do the same thing every time you went to a different city, or what would you do?
What would I do? I mean, I was just kind of like, I don't know, just trying to figure it out. I worked for immediately after college, I wanted to work for film festivals. I was considering trying to like find some sort of step into the film world that wasn't Hollywood, even though I immediately went to LA after college. But I found jobs at film festivals, and I really loved it because it was festivals were like only 2 weeks out of the year, and you would have like 9 months of preparation. And I like really like event planning. I like going to art events and stuff like that. So after I worked for the Newport Beach Film Festival immediately after college, and then after that I just kind of was like applying to different ones because I started to meet other people who worked for festivals, and it was a gig where like it paid for you to travel, and a lot of times the festivals will house you or give you a stipend and give you food, so there's like some sort of like free perk involved, so it's like cheaper travel than just doing it on your own. um, so I was just kind of following festivals, and then I would save up a bunch of money, and then I would just like go abroad. I worked some camp jobs where I was cooking for a service camp, and that was really fun. I mostly was finding work that paid for me to live there for free, and I didn't have to pay rent. So that was actually also, I think, for 4 years I wasn't paying rent, which was a good perk.
It's a
And
great
then
perk.
it was great, yeah. But it's also exhausting, and like, I don't know, I never really had like I was living out of a suitcase for a while. I didn't own anything. And then I was on a 9 month traveling film festival tour job where we went to different universities and we challenged students and gave them equipment to make a film in 7 days. And my job was essentially like a sales job, but also event planning. So we did like a premiere festival at the end of each week. But in that, I went to 5 states in those 9 months, and we were based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So I would go back to Atlanta every month, every 6 weeks, and that was really fun. I really liked Atlanta, but that was just keeping me in a different state consistently, and that got really tiring.
That sounds really intense to go up and travel and then, rent or sell equipment and put on a new event for a different school. How how many schools would you do in like a month or 6 weeks?
Over, we would do like overlaps. So I was in Atlanta for 6 weeks and we did six schools. So
Wow.
we would do kind of like yeah, they always overlapped. And then after Atlanta, and we went to some schools in the surrounding area of Georgia or Atlanta, Georgia. I ended up going to Missouri for 2 weeks. We went to a school in Indiana and we went to a school in North Carolina. I feel like I'm forgetting one, but that was a really fun time because we were going between like that middle Midwest part, and we would drive through Nashville like every 3 months. So I went to Nashville a lot because it was just like a fun pit stop. And that was an interesting just perspective of like I feel like I understand Nashville, and I never thought I would be visiting Nashville this often.
What's
Uh,
Nashville like?
it's a really fun town. I remember one of my Uber drivers was telling us how it at that time it had surpassed Las Vegas for bachelorette and bachelor parties. So it was like a really big, just like dance town. Like there's one strip it's called Broadway where all of the clubs are, or dances, and the bars are. And it's just kind of like pick your music. What I thought was really interesting was that their front windows were shutters, so of the bar, so they opened up, so like you could literally just like be on the sidewalk, but you could reach in, and people were like just standing there.
Wow.
But it was just like a fun dancing place to go and just to have fun.
It sounds like a blast. How
Yeah.
how did you and your group travel around the area? Was it like in a van?
So yeah, we had a minivan that was kind of our like day to day car, and then to move the storage, we had a piss yellow colored box truck that we drove. Um, it was the ugliest thing. It
Piss
was the most
yellow.
obnoxious thing. Yes, it was disgusting. But yeah, I was driving a box truck for 9 months.
You were driving the
Actually,
truck.
I was driving the truck. I actually
Wow.
have a really funny story where, I mean, I'm not the only one where I think all of my tour members probably have a near death experience in driving the box truck. But I can't remember exactly. I think it was a 13-foot high box truck. And we were driving through the Chattanooga Mountains in Tennessee to get to, I think we were going to Missouri. And we had to drive through a mountain. And we're like driving alongside a mountain. Like in California, you drive around like PCH and it gets really curvy and narrow. And I remember seeing as we were driving these signs for if like a truck needs to basically drive off the side of the road. They like have a pavement for that, so it's safe. So if there's like ever an accident and the truck needs to swerve rather than like causing a pile up, you drive down the mountain. Um, but we were driving on this mountain road, and all of a sudden I start seeing signs for a tunnel coming up, and the height was 10 feet, and we were in a 13-foot box truck. And I just remember freaking out because there's no turning back. Like I couldn't just exit, or I mean, if I did, it would be driving down the mountain. And I just remember thinking, and I had a person in the car with me, like freaking out, like, this is how we're
The
gonna
person
die.
was freaking out too, the other person in the car.
He was trying to calm me down,
Okay.
but I was driving and I was like, no, I don't think you understand. We're going to die. And in my head, I was like, this is what's going to happen. And luckily we cleared it. But I remember thinking, like, after that experience, I don't know who to trust. Like, we were definitely above that maximum where those signs just kind of like estimates, and they definitely give you like a few inches of leeway. But that was a very terrifying experience. And after that, I remember telling my coworkers, like, I'm not driving through the mountains anymore. Like, I'll take my turn on the streets, on the like long roads. Um, so yeah, we were trekking around in those two vehicles.
Wow, that's gnarly.
It was it was funny because before that I wasn't doing much driving. And then in doing that, I was just driving every day, all the time. So it was kind of an interesting, I don't know, just transition for me of like constantly being in a car. But it was fun. Like it was a really good experience. I met a lot of really great people. The people I worked with are like some of my closest friends now. And I mean, I like fell in love with towns in middle America that I never would have thought I would have fallen in love with. So that was really cool.
What was that, culture? Was there any culture shock of moving to the southern part of the country versus living in California?
Um, Honestly, not really. I remember being in Atlanta and thinking it reminded me a lot of Los Angeles. Yeah, just, and I don't know if it was because at the time the film scene was just starting to escalate. So there were, and I was in a film job, so it was all around a lot of film people. So it felt very familiar to how I was living in LA. And also, I mean, gentrification was kind of like starting at that time too. So there was kind of this trendy vibe that was occurring and sprouting that was very much LA. But even just in like, there's a lot of murals and graffiti art going on. The food is really good. There's so many mom and pop shops there. Like honestly, like when I think of Atlanta, I just think about the food that I miss. So I don't think there was too much of a culture shock. And then even going to the Midwest towns, I went to school in the Midwest, so there were often times where like I just feel like I'm back in Ohio. Like this is normal for me. Um, I think the most surprising thing for me was when we went to North Carolina in Thanksgiving time, like just so November, and it was really cold, and I didn't expect it to be that cold in the South. So that was kind of like the only like kind of surprises that I felt there.
I've heard it's really cold. Actually, my coworker was saying he got caught in a blizzard in Texas over the weekend. So,
Ugh,
yeah, I guess it
no,
is not fun. No.
not for me.
No, definitely not in the mountains of Tennessee.
Yeah, not at all.
W- How so how was the experience of putting on an event? A Was it a, like, would they act after the week of, your team being on the campus? What was that event like at the end of the time?
Yeah, so we tried to make it as like Hollywood premiere-esque as possible. Like we advertised it as a premiere screening because it would be the first time that the contestants would be seeing their films. It'd be the first times like we encouraged them to invite their friends, their family if they lived around, like anybody that they knew. So it was like the first debut. And the other part of it is that it's also a challenge. So we only, like say we go to a school and we get 50 films, we only screen 16 because they're 5 minutes or less. And if every film is 5 minutes and we did 50, like you're just, it's an all day event. So we try to like cap at it like 2 hours, like maybe 3 hours. So it's also to find out if you made it into the top 16. And then we also do a top four. We call those the grand jury prize winners. Actually, that might be wrong. I can't remember. But they get an award. It's the top four, and then those four would move on to the next stage where we'd have like a national event because we were going to 50 schools at the time. So we had three different tours. Like I was on the Atlanta Midwest tour, and there was a California tour, and then there was an East Coast Florida tour. So in total, we went to 50 universities in the country, and then every school had a top four. And at the end of the school year, so in June or maybe July, so summertime, those four are invited to go to Atlanta and then compete against each other. And then there's more awards involved. So it's kind of like a mix between like an actual film festival where you're going and screening. We're trying to make it very much like connect with other filmmakers, like make new friends. Like it is a college event. So there's freshmen, there's seniors, there's people where it's like you're in the film school, you're not in the film school, like meet and collaborate, but also like you could win something. So it's just like it was supposed to be like a fun time. And just depending on the size of the school and the size of the crowd, I mean, there was always just like a lot of adrenaline going on. I would have to host a few of them where like I'd be on the stage emceeing and just kind of like being the transition between things, and we would give out prizes. So it was like tossing t-shirts to the crowd a lot. So there's just a lot of adrenaline and fun. And if I wasn't on stage, I'd be with my coworkers in the back, like just hanging out and making sure that we had like food and there weren't any like minor fires that needed to be put out.
Nice. That sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, looking back on it, in the moment, it sounds like it could be a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. I mean, again, like the people I worked with, they're still very actively in my lives. Like that's a group of people that like my biggest joy, and I think what I take from that is my coworkers and the people I met along the way. I didn't realize like the relationships I was going to make with them, and even they were from different parts of the country as well. So, and we all talk about it, like we've all done the same job. Like it's really taxing, it's really hard. So we've all kind of like gone through it together, and that's probably bonded us too. And I meet people who worked like years before me or years after me, and we still have like this like tight connection because we've done the same job. Um, and then yeah, there's just moments where like I talked with one of my coworkers, I'm like, you were my wife on that job. Like we spent 9 months together, sharing Airbnb, sharing hotel rooms. Like there are times where we're just in North Carolina and we don't know anybody else. So the two of us were going out, just the two of us, very consistently, like being each other's wing woman, just like I don't know, just like we were together that whole time. So it was a really fun time.
Sounds really fun. How did you decide? Did you know before you left college that you wanted to be in film?
I don't know. I think when I left college, it was what I wanted to pursue at the time. I've always loved films, like they bring me joy. And then growing up close to LA, it just was kind of like there and very prominent. And I studied film in school, and most of my friends were involved in film, whether they were filmmakers or musicians or writers. So it was always just like actively on my mind, and it still is. So it was just, and I mean, yeah, I think my last year of college, I have family members who work on sets. So I like went and visited sets with them, just kind of like see what it was like. And I think, yeah, working for festivals was just like a different route that I wanted to try, because I like that it's like you're working with filmmakers, but you're also kind of like supporting artists. Like it's a community oriented event where it's like a place for artists to come, whether you're the filmmaker or if you're an audience member, or if you're like, I have mostly worked for children's festivals and like seeing children like meet filmmakers and it's like, whoa, I could do this, and like learning how to make a film. So I really like that aspect of festivals, which I didn't know I was going to enjoy until I just started to do it, and just kind of like seeing that joy in the community that festivals create. Um, but yeah, I think that it's always been something that I've like wanted to keep actively in my life, is just like being a part of, whether it's film or just being a part of like an arts community.
Yeah, being part of an arts community is really subtly enjoyable. I think
Yeah.
like you get all like the murals on the walls and then the really nice food and you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's just I mean growing up in California, I think we took it for granted. Places like
Mm-hmm.
Venice Beach or here Ocean Beach in San Diego.
Yeah, I think about that too, where I think spending so much time away from California in my life, whenever I come back, it made me realize like I grew up in a really like beautiful area, not just environment wise, but like in an artistic community. I don't know, like we live so close to Laguna Beach. I spent so many summers going to the pageant of the Masters or going to the Sawdust Festival, and they do the art walks on Thursdays. Like I didn't realize how kind of like ingrained it was in that culture until I left, where I went to kind of like a more, I don't know, like it was still, I think it was still in like thriving artistic communities, but in a different way.
Is this
And then have,
college?
Yeah, yeah. But the other thing I always talk about with people about California is that because we don't have seasons, it's like a year-round thing, and that was something even with the festivals where or the traveling festival I'd go to, I'd always like, well, what if we did it outside? And they'd be like, rain, snow, like it's September, we can't plan for an outside event because it's fall, and that just never occurred to me. I was like, why can't we just do it outside? Like every time I'd suggest that, and it was just constantly shut down because like weather is an issue in other parts of the world.
That is crazy. Like we don't really think about that. I was thinking about that actually during these lockdowns that have been implemented, because
Mm-hmm.
in summer they were just putting tables onto the sidewalks here, and everyone was eating outside, but now it's like way too cold. I think I saw a meme of some guy eating pizza in a blizzard in Times Square, and just
Mm,
just like really making a joke of it. But
yeah.
it's, yeah, you can't, especially festivals. I mean, I, I don't know much about film festivals besides I've heard of Sundance Film Festival, but the music festivals are always, like they start in March and they end in September, and there's no
Mm,
winter or fall festivals either there.
yeah, yeah. It's that was some that's definitely a new concept that I learned. I don't know if I still learned it, but I'm like aware of it now.
Wow. How was your education in film? What did you feel you gained from that?
Oh, that's such a good question. What did I gain? I think so. I my school had like two different departments. They had a film department and then they had a media production department. And I took more film classes because they offered like it was more theory. So it was literally just like sitting in a room watching a movie and then talking about it the next day. But they had this really cool film class where we learned how to use 16 millimeter film cameras and we got to shoot a film on them. So I think that made a really big impression of just like that's what people were using like how many years ago. um and the physicality of it, like I learned how to edit where at that point you would take the film and you would literally cut it. And I learned how to use this really big editing machine, and that was just like really fun because I like to work with my hands. So I think that left this impression of kind of like permanency with film of like we when you make a cut or when you make a decision and you're like curating a story with film, now it's like you can always do like a director's cut or you can do like an extended, like everything gets saved. But even back then, like with those editing machines, it was really easy for the film to catch on fire. Like they're super flammable. So some like there's stories of just like movies completely getting lost or certain cuts completely getting lost, and like that's kind of it. So I liked that aspect of learning that there's kind of like more care with it, and you have to be very intentional about like what you're choosing for each scene and like why you're choosing it for how you're making the film and like what story or what emotions you're trying to evoke and all of that. So I think that was really, yeah, that just left an impact on me of just kind of like being intentional with storytelling.
That's that's a good way to think about it, especially today. Like, if I film something, I can film it 50 times on my iPhone and just boom, boom, boom. Not really, just
Mm-hmm.
quantity more than quality.
Yeah, and that's the other aspect is that when they would buy film, you only had a certain amount. Like it's like the Kodak cameras, like you only had 25 pictures, and once you're out, you're out. So you have to be intentional about like what you're going to use too. So that's also, I think, a part of that because now it's like I can recreate and do so many options to choose from, which I think can be a little overwhelming. So I really like the challenge of kind of like the minimalism and the simplicity of I went to a music festival and I took a Kodak camera with me because I only wanted to take 25 photos and I was kind of being really picky about it. And I even remember like with the group I was with, we were just taking photos. And I thought, oh, I want to take one with my camera. And they wanted to do like, they were like, oh, I don't think I looked good, or I want to do it this way, I want to do that way. And I was like, I only have 4 more photos left. No, like that was it. And then I said, someone give me an electronic phone. Like it was just a really funny moment because I don't think they realized that I'd switched cameras. So I kind of like the thought process of choosing what you capture.
Yes, that's an awesome lesson to gain. This equipment, the 16 millimeter camera, and when was that used and phased out of film?
Um, I mean, some filmmakers still use it. Quentin Tarantino still likes to use it. He has certain films. I think almost all of his films have that. And then I don't know when it was like, I mean, now it's just more expensive. Like that's kind of the issue, is the expense of the equipment and then maintaining the equipment as well. So I want to say, like, we have one in my house. My dad used it in the 70s when he was a high schooler to make movies. So that was still when it was like pretty prominent. I want to say probably like the 80s when they started having the handhelds and stuff like that. I don't really know too much of its history, but yeah, probably that's when like tech really started to improve.
Okay, got it. And then it went to the handhelds that we're kind of all familiar with.
Yeah, and I think it also had more to do with the storage. Like, think about how we had floppy disks and then we've advanced to like CDs and now we have the cloud. So I think that had more to do with filmmaking, of just like being able to save and the storage capacities and stuff like that.
That makes sense. And then you can get all your cuts in, your director's cut or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And when you were done with your what would you call that job? The one where you were based in Atlanta?
We called it touring.
Touring?
Yeah, like we would always say like, when we were on tour or when we were done touring.
So when you were done touring throughout the South and then Midwest, and you moved to San Francisco, did you stay with a job in film or film festivals?
Yes and no. So I actually switched gears and I started teaching. Um, I got a job. I was an after school teacher. I didn't study teaching. I'm not a certified teacher. I'm not a teacher. I don't want to claim to be one because I don't think that I'm educated in it. But while I was in San Francisco, I volunteered for a bunch of festivals out there because they have so many. So I volunteered for the Green Film Festival, the Frameline Film Festival, which is a queer film festival, and then the San Francisco International Film Festival. And that was really fun because I basically I got to see movies for free. I got to go to a bunch of different venues too. Like San Francisco still has really beautiful theaters that have been restored, and San Francisco has AMC and Cinemark, but they still have these gorgeous like two. I think only like one theater in the house, and it's still like really old school. So that was really fun because I again just got to go for free and experience all of that. But that was more kind of like in my downtime. My main job was my after school job, working with kids.
Got it. And was the main reason you decided to teach just to cool it down from the touring?
I think so. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, to be honest. Um, so the jobs that I had for festivals were typically titled events assistant or program assistants because it's a program. So that's typically like what I would Google my job searches. And I mean, the organization I worked for was like super cool. They were super into the arts and supporting the arts. And I worked for an elementary school program, and they did their own film festival where the
Nice.
fifth graders at like 9 different schools made films, like were taught how to make them, and then they did a festival. So I read like all these events that they do through the organization, thinking I was like going to be assisting in that capacity. And even in my interview, like I knew I'd be working with kids, but I thought it was going to be what it was like with the other festivals where I was like in an office planning events, working with people my age, and then like seeing the children like once a month or when the event happened for like a few hours and just like hanging out for the day. And I remember I showed up for my training and everybody kept asking me like why I wanted to be a teacher, what grade am I teaching? And I was so overwhelmed because I was like, I'm not a teacher. Like I'm not certified to be a teacher. What happened? And also that day of training, I couldn't find my boss who hired me because he had food poisoning, so he wasn't there. And this was like a training for like all 9 schools. So I didn't know like who I didn't know anybody. And I was just like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Um, and then I ended up finally meeting coworkers and I talked to one girl and I remember asking her like, what is my job? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I being given a class? Like, what's happening? And she just like laid it all out for me and it kind of calmed me down. But I remember I was staying with a friend at the time and I remember going home and telling her like, I think I'm gonna be teaching. Like, I don't know what to do. But I was also kind of excited. I was like, I've never done this before. Like, this could be really fun. And she kind of hyped me up, and we both were like, oh my gosh, this is cool. I'm doing something completely new. And it ended up being really great. Like, I loved it. I stayed for a second year. Um, I didn't know I was gonna love it as much as I did, so it ended up working out.
That's that initial start sounds really, like you said, overwhelming. I mean, nine different schools, and you're just the guy who hired you isn't there.
Yeah, it was really overwhelming, and it was like a training program where they like split us up in all these groups. So you're meeting new people, and it was interesting because I ended up when I finally met my site's coworkers, I ended up realizing like I'd already met them through the training program, so that was kind of exciting. It was kind of cool to like make an impression and to make an impression without knowing who I was working with because I didn't really feel pressured to like do anything. Like they would just ask a question to the group, and I felt a little more at ease to just be like, "This is what I think." And then later, I met my coworkers, and we had stuff to talk about. I was like, "Oh, you were in this group, and you said this, and I like what you said about that." And it started a really good dialogue and relationship with those coworkers.
That is an awesome experience when you describe it like that, because going into a new job, if you're like surrounded by people you know you're going to see every day for the next,
Mm-hmm.
9 to 24 months, and your new boss, it's like, I'm not going to tell you everything I think right now,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, I think yeah, it was like this interesting, like internally I was screaming, but externally I was feeling really like kind of interested in like what was going on. So yeah, it ended up being again a really good experience. But in the moment, it's just I mean, that's kind of what happens when you do anything new. Like it's just so uncomfortable and you're just kind of screaming on the inside and you're kind of in that like fight or flight situation of like, what do I do right now? Like I could just leave. I could have just left, but instead, yeah, you stay and then you see what happens.
see what happens, and then you know get expand your comfort zone sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think was great about teaching? What age were your students?
So my first year, I had fourth graders. I think what I liked that age, and what I liked about my organization because since I was an after school teacher, I wasn't doing anything with academics. I didn't have to like follow any sort of like standardized anything. There were no tests. Like I mean, I had like I was teaching storytelling, so I had like I would have to send in lesson plans and have a point, have an intention for every day and every week. But what I liked was that it was so kind of like fluid, and I would just always show up to see like what mood my kids were in and just kind of base off like what we were going to do that day because like sometimes you're just in a bad mood. So what I liked was that in that job, I realized like the way I talk to them, even though they're 9 and 10, doesn't have to be different from how I talk to my peers of the same age, or even how to talk to like adults. Because a part of that job, which I didn't realize either in the beginning, is that I had to make relationships with their parents who ranged from like 20s to 50s. And sometimes I was talking to grandparents who were in their 80s. So I was constantly talking to people in different age ranges all the time. And I think I just realized like I don't need to talk differently, like baby it down for the 9-year-olds, or like try to like be more like sophisticated and polite with the adults. So it definitely kind of felt like I was able to be a little more authentic and just real. And that was a really nice, like freeing feeling of, I think it created a lot of like respect between me and my students. And then even with their parents and even with my coworkers, of just like if there was an issue or something was happening, I could just like pull my student over and be like, so like you said this, they said this. And it wasn't like the dialogue changed. It wasn't um like a perception changed or like the mood changed. It was very much like a very real, like the way we speak can be the same way that you speak to somebody else. So I really liked that aspect of just kind of like children aren't that scary. And then adults aren't that scary. Like we're all just humans.
What
So
is it that's scary?
I said children aren't that scary. Like I think sometimes working with kids can be a little intimidating. And then sometimes talking to like people who are much older than you can be really intimidating, especially like when you're just kind of like perceiving somebody off of like what they're looking like first impressions are definitely like an exterior perspective. So I think that in this job it made me realize like it doesn't have to be that scary.
Nice. Were the most of your coworkers from your touring job your age?
For my touring job, yes. Yeah, everybody was between, I want to say 21, and then I mean, yeah, 21 and 30. So we were like in the same decade.
Okay. And your your fellow teachers, were they various ages as well?
Yeah, we had a lot of college students do it as like a part-time job. So there was like I worked with a girl who was 19, um, and then I want to say some people were like in their early 30s. And then we worked with, because I had to work with and collaborate. We called them our day school teachers, so like yeah, the day school staff. And even that was interesting of realizing I was the same age as some of them, because when you're a kid you think they're so much older than you, and I kind of had that realization of like, whoa, I'm that age, like I'm that's me. And looking back at those teachers who were I thought were like just much older because they were taller and because they were bigger than me, but really they're not that much older in like retrospect. But then there were some teachers who were in their 50s and in their 60s as well. Uh, so yeah, it was like a varying scale.
Got it. It can be tough. Like for me, I work with a lot of people in their 50s and 60s, and initially learning how to speak, and that you can be yourself, and you don't need to like just put on this, not necessarily a disguise, but kind of, you know, have a demeanor when you're with them that you need to present, and you can't really present anything else. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
they're people too. They understand. And
Yeah, I think especially as like I would still consider as young adults, they're they were like they're adults, like they're older adults. I'm not saying like they're elders necessarily, but we're still in that transition where like when we were teenagers, we had to like come to our much older adults as like respectful and more polite. And there's just like at least that's how like I felt, where it's like there's a way you're supposed to like speak to your teacher. But then as now being a young adult and being in these professions and working with people who are older than me, thinking like, nah, like we're equals. Like you're not necessarily like my superior anymore. And obviously I'm still gonna respect you, but it's not because of your age, it's not because of the wrinkles that you have. It's just like just mutual respect of being a human. And it's also, I think, like in that way you're advocating for like the respect back. Like you're not an inferior just because you're 40 years or 10 years younger than them.
Yeah, it's tough, I think, for everyone to accept because you're 40 years younger than them, or and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and it's like, wait a second, this person's in their 20s and they think they know what's going on. I've been alive
Yeah.
for over twice their lifespan.
Yeah, that life experience really I think it like alters people's perceptions for sure.
Yes, it does. So to shift, you not only are interested in film, but you're also interested in writing.
Yes, very much so.
So what I have one poem you recently posted that I want to read out.
Mm-hmm.
Island Magic. Like wearing a snug sweater or receiving a hug from a lover, engulfed by the ocean, the salty air releasing a feeling of ease, finally able to breathe, simply knowing that the sea is just beyond the trees. Sara Danielle.
You
That's
read that so well. Thank you.
you, did I? I'm glad you said that. I didn't want to butcher it.
That was great.
A lot. I I read through a lot of your poetry, and a lot of it references the ocean or the sea. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty simple in that I just love the ocean. um, I like we grew up in Southern California, so close to the beach. That was a regular activity in my life. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I was born in Florida. And we moved to Orange County when I was 6. But so even in Florida, I learned to ride a bike on the beach. Like it was a very consistent environment from like when I was born until I was 18. Um, so I think it's just kind of like I love it there. And then in going to school in the Midwest and being surrounded by trees, it was just a very interesting environment. That was a culture shock. Um, in that, like, it was interesting. So where I went to school, my parents are from, my family's from, so I spent all my summers going there. So it wasn't super shocking. Like I knew that place. That place is a home. Um, but living there full time was this like the habits and the environment's different. Um, and being so far away from the ocean and the activities involved in that definitely kind of made me like miss the ocean. Like was it? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the phrase where. Um, anyways, I can't remember the phrase, but I missed it. And then again after college, I spent so much time like going back and forth between California and then not being in California and living in states where I was like, it was just like not an option to go to the beach. And it was actually after my touring job where we finally went to Savannah, Georgia for St. Patrick's Day because they have a really big St. Patrick's festival. And we stayed in Hilton Head, which is like in South Carolina, just across the water. And that was the first time that I went to the beach, I think, in like 7 months. And I was just so ecstatic. Like I was like feeling just very calm and very like inspired and just so like alive. And even I remember on that day, I like wrote this basic like love letter, but also kind of like vow that I was never gonna live in a place that wasn't by the ocean. It's like I'm like I called it chasing beaches, where it's like I don't care what beach it is, but I'm gonna live by the ocean because I've spent so much time away from it that it kind of made me realize like this just makes sense to me. Um, I actually read this or watched this documentary in college about where the term your homeland comes from. It's a part of like folklore where because we're made up of water, we're 60%, 60 or 80% water, that where you're born, you are connected to the body of water that you are near. And I remember watching that, and I remember asking people, like, what's your favorite body of water? And then I'd ask them, like, okay, where were you born? Like, were you, like, how do you feel about the ocean? And I was in Ohio and I watched that, and I remember like a good majority of people were like, yeah, I love lakes, I love rivers, I love going into like creeks and that, like those kinds of bodies of water. And I was like, I can't do that. I love the ocean. I love like the saltiness. I love the sea life that's in the ocean. Like even there was a lake near where my school was, but people would always say like, don't go swimming in it because it's mostly filled with beast poop. Like to me, I was like, it's so gross. Like I don't want to go in there. Um, so I don't know. So like I think about that often of just like I feel very connected to the ocean because I was born by it. I lived by it. It was just such an active part of who I was growing up. Um, and then just like I don't know, there's just so much to it. Like it's really expansive. I read a lot of mythology and folklore about the ocean and just like really beautiful stories and other poets that think about it. And it's just, I don't know, I just love it.
I love it too. And you were separated from it for a long time. I I've
Mm-hmm.
I've been here, this whole time, Southern California, and it's you kind of leave it, you're within 5 miles of it, and then you don't go there in a month or 2 months. But then when you're forced away from it for years, that's n- and you grew up with it. I mean, it's really
Mm-hmm.
nice to have.
It is. I mean, yeah, I like that's to say, like, you don't go to the beach every single day. Like, I think it's been 4 days since I went, but it is kind of, it's nice to know that it's there and it's an option. Um, yeah, yeah, it's nice that it's always going to be there when you live near it. And it's really hard to know how far away it is when you live far away from it, at least for me.
Yes. Well, congratulations on finding your way back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, how when did you first start writing, and how did you gain the interest?
Um, I mean, I remember I was in second grade and I was given a journal for the first time. And we did journal like exercises during class, or our teacher would give us a prompt. And I just really loved that time because it was really quiet and I got to do whatever I wanted with these stories. And I remember my favorite days would be the like freebie day where you get to decide to write about whatever you want. I actually still have the journal because I used to write these really intense soap operas with like divorce and unexpected pregnancies and like affairs and
In
like
second grade?
in second grade.
Wow.
This is like a really vivid memory because I remember I wrote these stories in second grade and I took this journal with me to Ohio to visit my cousins and I would read them out loud. And even they still have memories of like, remember your soap operas and like, yeah, like that's I love drama. Like my sister says it every day, like I love the drama of stories. So that yeah, now I can remember through elementary school during creative writing activities they were usually like holiday themed, but I remember in third and fourth grade writing like Halloween stories, writing Valentine's Day stories and St. Patrick's Day stories. So yeah, I think it's just kind of always been an activity that I've enjoyed. Um, yeah, it's just always been there for me.
Nice. Were you able to implement that within any of your jobs? Like, did you, within your film jobs, were you given the opportunity to write?
Um, Not the writing that I like to do. Like I would write copy or I would write synopsises for the films I would watch and I would edit some things or I'd write blog posts about celebrities or like past stories of the festival. But yeah, that's actually something that I think has been difficult for me as a writer and like either like making it and like my occupation or finding it as a part of my occupation because I feel like I write, it's really just like really personal for me. And I really don't like being told what to write, um, which I should probably get over. But it's just really like the fun's gone. There's like no, it's just, I feel boxed in. Um, and when I am told, it's just kind of a different kind of writing because in those jobs, it's like, no, you have to do this. Like you have to write a press release. You have to write this blog post. So I would do it, but it definitely didn't feel as authentic as when I'm writing creatively. Um, but in that, like I've written creative pieces and I guess like more like opinion based pieces for just like random websites that they would post as like a random blog post. And those have been fun. I haven't been paid for any of that. But it's like I still have those opportunities.
That's those opportunities are still, rewarding in their own way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what type of writing do you enjoy writing?
I mean, definitely poetry. Um, I think, I don't know, there's times where I'm like, is this poetry or is this prose? Like, what really is the difference?
What what was that, prose?
Yeah, prose or poetry.
What what is prose?
So I guess prose is considered like long for like a short story would be considered prose. It's longer. I might be wrong. Maybe someone will correct me on that. But even I have trouble kind of distinguishing the difference. Like I feel like everything I write is prose, because for me at least, it's I like to write with the sense that there's like a beginning, middle, and end. Because there are a lot of poets who write like really beautiful, just like one-liners or sentences. So I guess I like to write like just like what I've been writing of just like very like image like symbolic stories that have like a vivid, like I'm using the ocean as a theme or a symbol or a metaphor for something deeper that's like really about either an experience or just about feelings. So kind of just conveying like what the human experience feels like, but through imagery and using nature and the elements.
What how how do you usually start a poem, or does it kind of happen on a whim? Is there any like kind of like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but really intentional? Is it intentional, or is it more kind of just comes about on its own?
Um, I think that there's definitely just moments where just something just pops in my head. Um, like I can think back on poems where I'm just like walking and I'm somewhere and I'm observing something or I'm doing something and it's just like all of a sudden something pops in my head and I have to write it down. It actually happens to me a lot on airplanes, and I have a lot of things written down on barf bags and airplane napkins. Um, and but then there are times where I just feel like I want to write and I just kind of like sit down and I just kind of write what I'm thinking and then slowly things start to come about. Or I'll be writing and reflecting on something and then like a poem will form, if that makes any sense. So I'm not sure if I've ever really, I mean, I have because I took poetry classes in college where it's like, write a poem this week about a sunflower or write a sonnet or write a haiku. Like I had specific elements or forms or styles that I had to abide by. And even that was, I enjoyed that because there was time, like I had, since it was homework, I had to go and sit down and do that intentionally. So I think there's like a time to like, I intentionally create space or create time for me to write and not necessarily, I'm going to write a poem about an island, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. It's not like I'm gonna write this poem, I'm going to finish it at time X, and then, tomorrow
Mhm.
I'm going to start a new poem and finish it. It's more like I'm just going to write right now and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. And how, s- so you say you write poetry and prose mostly now, and you used to write more like, and when you were younger, you'd write out like stories and soap operas. How
Mhm.
long were those stories? Or
I don't think they were that long. I mean, this was all like I was 10 or younger. I think I was in fifth grade and I wrote a 12-page story, and that was like
wow,
a really big moment for me.
that's tough.
Yeah, and it was like back to back. Like I was super. I had to keep. I remember I kept going to my teacher like, I need more paper because it was like themed paper. So that was cool. Yeah, I think they were. Yeah, I think that was the longest, but they were never really that long. Like that's something that I've realized about myself is I write scenes, and I think that's also why I like film, or that kind of shows my love of film is that, and I really like get hard on myself for it. Or I'm like I feel like I've never finished a short story, or I've been written a novel because I write scenes. I write like a scene of dialogue, and that's kind of it. Like I'm not interested in anything else. I was only interested in that scene with those people and describing that event. And I don't know how or what else to say. Like that's all I cared about. And then I just walk away from it. And there was a time where I like was really hard on myself, like why can't I do more? And I'm slowly accepting like that can be something in itself as well. And that's like enough for me because it is, because I don't have anything else to give for that story, clearly.
I understand that. And sometimes more is less, and you're not really trying to convey, like, you've already got everything you need in these certain, however many lines, and to
Mm-hmm.
to add on more for the sake of having a longer writing is kind of, takes away from the art.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, going to your point of scenes, like, I never thought about it like that, like having a scene in a book versus just thinking about a book as a whole, from page one to the last page. But then I had a friend, we were reading, or I read a nonfiction or a fictional book after he read it, and he was just describing to me a particular scene in the book, and he was like, "This is one of the greatest scenes of any book I've ever read." And I was like, wow, I mean, you're really going from like just one single chapter in the book and like really just taking everything you can out of that single chapter. And it made me look, have a different view on reading stories.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know if I've ever had that perspective with a long with a novel. So it's I like that. Yeah. Can I ask when did you start writing poetry? Or because you've only just recently started to share.
Yes, I had my first job out of college. I was writing a lot. It was a lot of technical writing and a lot of proposals and test writing, and it was pretty technical, but it got me into a sort of like just into the uh, habit of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I switched jobs into a job in which I had no writing. And I didn't realize this is how it worked. I just eventually, like, looking back on it, I was like, wait, I stopped writing professionally. And then that's when I started writing just on my own. And that was at the beginning of 2019.
Oh
So
wow, that's really interesting.
it was interesting, and it was really helpful to be able to just like you said, that's why I asked what prose was, because I'm pretty sure I'm the same way in the sense that I don't think I write poetry. I write prose, and it it helps, and I also, like, sometimes I'm intentional in the sense that I want to finish a poem, but really it's like blocking out time to write, and then it might not be perfect by the end of that, or you might not have gotten all you wanted out of it. But that's kind of how I started. I was like, I'm just going to write right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then posting poetry is a whole another ball game. And I wanted to ask you about that is how did you, or what was the reason you started posting? And I guess we'll start with that one.
Yeah. Um, I feel like I was late to the game with posting poetry because what happened in 2016, I went to the Netherlands and I went there for 2 months, and a part of that, I was challenging myself to write a poem a day. And I had a blog at the time, but through WordPress. And this was before, I think it was like on the cusp of like Squarespace beginning. So WordPress was like the free website outlet that people were using. And I just never occurred to me to share it on Instagram because that felt very vulnerable. Um, and that was also something like, did you ever have a Tumblr?
No, I didn't.
Do you know what Tumblr is though?
I do know what Tumblr is.
Okay, so like I had a Tumblr, and I think what I really enjoyed about Tumblr was that it was like my own. Like there were no consequences of people in my day to day life reading or seeing my feelings. So at that time, my Instagram was definitely like this public, like just photos of my life, like a scrapbook of my life. And I was using WordPress. And I think some people that knew me, like family, followed me on there, but it was mostly, again, strangers and other writers. And I kind of, at that time at least, preferred that. It just, and even now, I think it's easier for me to share with a stranger because there's just no consequence in that. It's like, I'm never going to see you again. Or maybe I'll see you tomorrow briefly, but like, you're not in my life. Like, your opinion doesn't matter to me. Um, but I was in the Netherlands posting on that website a poem every day. And I was staying with a family friend who's also a writer. She's an artist, a painter. And she actually encouraged me and was like, you should post it on your Instagram. And I remember feeling a little like intimidated. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want people to know how I feel. Or even not even just how I feel, but just like these are like my poems. Like these are mine, and that's like it feels like I'm giving them to others. And then I can't really remember why or what happened or when it happened, but it just kind of happened, and it was right before the tour job. And it might be that it was because I was going to be traveling with strangers. Like I didn't know these people going into the job, and I was leaving like a day-to-day life of like not seeing family every day for an extended amount of time, not seeing like my close friends every day. So I think maybe that was comforting where like I could put it out there into the digital space and not have to like go see a friend and then like want to talk about it with me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So it felt safer. Um, and then it just became like a habit where, I mean, in those friends, because the tour job, almost everybody on there was like a creative in their own respect, were really supportive of my poetry too. And that was really thrilling. And then even in posting, like my family and my loved ones and my friends were commenting and like encouraging me. And that was really uplifting. So it was just like insecurity and pride was getting in my way. Um, so yeah, just kind of it happened overnight.
Nice. And it's pretty exciting, isn't it? To like, how do you feel
Yeah,
about it now?
yeah, I think it's interesting. It's always interesting to see like who enjoys them. And there was a person who from high school actually who I saw recently, and he came up to me and he was like, I love your poetry. And I hadn't seen him in years. And I was like, you read my poetry? Like I was super shocked and like so humbled, and I felt really loved at the time. And I was like, whoa. And at that time, like I took a break from posting on Instagram, just because I was deliberating with my relationship with social media and like technology and my phone, and like being so active on it. Like just I felt like I needed to take a break. And at that time I was like considering being like done. So it's interesting to like, I don't know who like is supporting you, but not just because like they love you, but because they like my words hopefully resonate with them and they want to read like what I have to say.
That's super rewarding. And
Mhm.
like, I have a friend who said once, he went to graduate school and he wrote a bunch of like research papers for SDSU. And one thing he said right after that was, no one's ever going to read these papers. And it's like, wow, well, that that sucks that you just said that. But
Yeah.
for your poetry and my poetry, our loved ones are reading those all the time.
Mhm.
And and it seems like you've had overwhelmingly positive feedback.
Yeah, I mean, no one's ever told me that they hated what I had to say, so that's been good.
That's been good. Yeah, I haven't gotten that yet, so
I
I hope
don't think you will.
I hope I won't. I hope I won't.
Yeah. What made you start posting and sharing?
I had it. I had the poetry written. It was in the middle of quarantine. There was nothing, like I wasn't going anywhere. I had nothing to post, and it, it it's kind of. I mean, I it it represents me in a lot of ways, and it's not like sometimes people take a poem as much more than it really is. Like
Mhm.
if I post something, my parents will be like, "What? Do you have something?" Yeah, it's like, no, it's just a piece of art that I got put together, and it's like putting it out there, just kind of helps me out in some ways, and it's nice to see like I hashtag it, and if like random people who I don't know also like it, then that's a rewarding plus. And
Mhm.
you know, if someone, if it's something that I find pretty real, like it's a feeling, like I posted one on depression and it was interesting to see who liked that. And, some of the most successful people I know were the ones that liked that poem. And I was like, this is just really nice to, for me, it's very enlightening. So
Mhm.
that was one reason or a couple reasons.
Yeah. Have you found have you found that you have like a favorite of yours and you're really excited to share it? And then I don't know if you like recognize how many like likes or comments you get on that. But then you have another poem that you just feel like mediocre about and you share it and then everybody loves that or you get just like more attention and you're like, "Oh, okay." Like I didn't know that that was like more provoking in a way than the ones that you kind of cherish more.
I do have that. I have a
Mhm.
couple that is like really near and dear to my heart, and like I personally think that is my best work, and it's just like
Mhm.
those are the bottom of the barrel on likes. And do you have a few of those poems as well?
Yeah, I think there's two where yeah, it kind of frustrates me. And then those two I wrote them one of them 6 years ago, the other one 4 years ago, and I keep editing them and reposting it like revision because I think I'm like searching for like it needs more work. Like one day it's gonna be loved by everybody as much as I love it, but I think we have to accept that that's just what we love.
Yeah, it's and it is what we love, and that's not like I feel like I usually can at least tell like if I post something that will really be well liked, there is some of my poems I do feel like I don't want to say selling out because I don't think I'm necessarily doing that, but appeasing a reader in some way. Not all the time, but with some of my poems I try to do that because like I just I enjoy one kind of expression I have is aligning my incentives with the incentives of those around me. And so it's not necessarily exactly like a perfect scenario for what I'm trying to describe, but it is in that sense like I do feel like I know what the general public will like, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
and that's not always what I like. And especially in regards to writing, sometimes like what I really enjoy writing I know that the general public is not a huge fan of this.
Like what? I'm
Like
interested.
I posted one about like my first. So I bow hunted a deer earlier this year, and it
I
was
heard,
not.
yes.
Yeah, it was not. It was pretty. I missed. I missed. I didn't miss, but like I hit it in the back of the leg, and it was and I had to track it, and it was just a lot. So I wrote a poem about that, and I knew no one was going to like that poem, but I posted it, and that's okay because I really like that poem,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of, you know, it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's I think it's just kind of like the thought of like art being objective or subjective. Like what your favorite piece isn't going to be the masses' favorite piece.
No, it's not. Have you ever thought about do you do any writing now besides poetry or prose, or would you ever write stories?
Yes, actually, at the beginning of quarantine, I got like a rush of adrenaline for a specific story that like I was like, this is gonna be a romance novel. I'm gonna write a romance novel. This is happening. And I was writing a lot for it between March and I think through June, maybe some parts of July. But because it was like, I don't know, it just got really draining. And that's for me is like a for projects because I think for me, even in poetry, there's like themes and like I have a book of poetry that I worked on for 5 years. So, and it was an idea that like I remember having in 2010, and I didn't complete it until 2018. So that's 8 years. Not 2010, sorry, 2014. 2010 was high school. No, it was an idea I had in college, and I finally like felt like it was completed in 2018. So it's 4 years. So when this idea came to my mind in March, I was like really in it once a week or daily, thinking about it, like obsessing over it. And I think by June or July, I was like, I just need a break because I remember there was a day where I was just like on the floor. It's like I'm exhausted. Um, so I walked away, and now it's January. So I don't know when I'm gonna walk back to it, but yeah, definitely have ideas for longer forms. And even like I was saying earlier, in realizing that I write scenes rather than like full on novels. I'm kind of like in the process of like circulating an idea of like making it a little more poetic, I guess, of just writing scenes rather than writing like a long form novel, but it has to do with one story right now. So I'm kind of in that habit of like, I guess, extending my prose, but not necessarily going like into anything greater than that.
That makes sense. And it's like a huge bite to take to like write a multi-hundred page novel.
Yeah, I looked it up. I remember like what's the average length of a romance novel, and I think it's between I think it's 200,
Wow.
maybe 220 is average. Like some people write 300, but then there's some that are only 150. Um, and I started. What's interesting is that in the last 2 years, I wasn't reading fiction. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, and when March when that started, I started reading fiction again, and I was like, fiction is so good. Like, why did I stop this? And it was really inspiring because I read some, I want to say like more modern romance novels, because like when you think of a romance novel, I think you think of something from the 80s. Um, so that's been encouraging, and they're like shorter lengths too. And even I had a friend say to me like, chapters can be however long as you want them. Like they don't have to be 20 pages. So I think in my head I've got really analytical in the like evaluation process of like what is a novel? A novel is 300 pages with 30 chapters that are, you know. So I've like slowly started to like take that away, and just like I'm trying to just like allow myself to write, just to give myself the space to write and see what happens.
That's I'm sure that'll be easier because I I tried to write a novel once and it was like I stressed myself out, very similar to you, and I think I lasted a month, maybe couple of months, and it was just like I have to step away right now because I was literally like you dedicating so much time to it, and I, I love the idea of it, but then it's like this is gonna be a marathon.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint by any means.
No,
Um, when were you trying to write your novel?
I wrote it. I had two different spurts. I got quite a bit, like I got 60 pages down in fall of last year, and then I realized I didn't like any of those. I didn't like the way I was going with it. So I tried again, I think in May, and I got 10 pages.
That's still a decent amount.
It's a decent amount, but it's like it's tough. I'm like, and as far as nonfiction goes, or sorry, yeah, nonfiction goes, I think less can be more. I've
Mm-hmm.
I've read a couple of nonfiction books that were like really short. I mean, you could finish them in like 2 3 hours, and they were great because nonfiction material is tough to digest.
Mm-hmm.
So too much of it is overwhelming.
Yes, that's very true. So is yours nonfiction?
No, mine is fiction. It is it's a science fiction. Mostly the premise is asteroid hitting the Earth in modern
Cool.
day.
Cool. I like that.
Well, yeah, if it ever comes out, maybe you could proof edit it.
Dude, yeah, please send me. I'll help you out. I was gonna ask you that. Do you have people that you share for like critique purposes solely?
No, I don't. Do you have people that you share for critique purposes?
Um, yes, now I do. I have a friend who I feel very comfortable with sending her my sending her poems, and even when because I enter contests every so often to submit poetry to anthologies, so I'll ask her like pick your favorite four of these 10, and just to see like you said, like we were saying how like what our favorite might not be what other people like. So yeah, I have one friend that I feel comfortable asking just like advice and giving her freedom to edit my work.
Does that's really awesome. That seems very comforting.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really happy. She's a recent friend, so I think when that relationship started and grew into that, I was excited that she accepted that when I originally asked.
Nice. Does she have writing experience or credentials?
Yeah, yeah, she's also a writer and an artist of other mediums as well. She also studied English in school, so I think that was a part of like our relationship was first starting. I remember her saying that she likes to edit work, so that was kind of like this, like, oh, you like to edit,
I've got some
wanna?
work.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's been a good relationship, I think.
Nice. I'm glad you have that. So what um fiction novels do you have that you've really enjoyed reading recently or in general?
So recently I read Normal People. Have you? It was a adapted into a TV show on Hulu. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
Yeah, it's a really good show. It's by an Irish writer, and I read that over the summer. And then I also read it's, I guess, is it like fiction mythology, or it's like mythical fiction, but I can't think of her name off the top of my head. but she wrote these two books about called Song of Achilles, and the other one's called Circe, and they're about the stories of Achilles and the stories of Circe, but they're fictionalized, so it's like extended mythology, and they were just really good escape books. I read those at the start of quarantine in March, and it was just a really happy escape because I think because they were like mythology, like it's dealing with like Greek and gods and goddesses, that it was so distant from what reality is right now that was really soothing to read at the time.
That sounds great. And what was that? What did you say? What was the word you just used to describe those books?
I guess it's like it's fiction mythology. It's fantasy. Like I think if you looked it up, it would be in the fantasy section. But it has to do with the myths of Achilles and Circe. But it's extended fiction. I've been reading mythology for the last few years, so even after reading that, a part of me is kind of like this is more of like an adaptation of the myth that is the story of Achilles, in my opinion, at least. Historians might beg to differ. I don't know, but so I think but they are considered fiction.
Okay, got it. And you were completely immersed in those, and awesome.
Yeah, very much.
Do you have any non-fictional recommendations that you've read recently during your stint with nonfiction?
Yeah. So the nonfiction books that I read are psychology books.
Wow.
Yeah, they're dealing with like your personalities. Um, so I read this author. It's called The Goddesses in Every Woman, and then she also wrote Gods in Every Man, and it's using the Greek gods and goddesses as archetypes for different personality personas that anyone has really. And so she wrote these books in the 80s, so they are very much like gendered as like male and female, but she even notes in them like this doesn't have to be, this book isn't specifically for women. Like anybody identifying as either sex can read this. Anyone who feels like feminine can read this. Even if you um, recognize yourself as being non-binary or a male, like reading Goddess in Every Woman, you might like learn something or learn something about someone who assigns themselves as female. But they're just really interesting because she goes into the stories of the gods and goddesses, and she uses them as examples of just personality types that you may have in yourself or you may experience in people around you. And that kind of dived me into this hole of reading more mythology, but also reading more psychology books on personalities. Because a lot of, at least psychologists who study Carl Jung, use a lot of god and goddess archetypes to represent like our psychosis. And I'm very much like a visual learner, so that has just like really helped me to visualize like what's going on in the world in like my own personal psychosis.
Okay. That was there particular like piece or particular piece of advice or way of thinking that was presented in those books that you found pretty helpful?
Yeah, at the very end of the goddess book, so she uses 7 different goddesses to represent 7 different possible archetypes that you could possess. Um, what I liked is that they're all different chapters, and at the end of each chapter, like she goes through like positive and negative traits, but she goes through like how you can overcome the negative, or how if you feel like you're a different archetype and you want to be more of this is how you can do that. And then at the very end, the last 3 chapters are essentially like her empowering you that all of these gods and goddesses are inside of you. Like you are one of many different qualities and characteristics. And to remember that, like, she has this image where it's like, think of it as a boardroom where it's your ego, and then it's also all of these different archetypes sitting in one room, discussing how to make a decision, but your like subconscious, your unconscious is also there to have a say and be like, I'm gonna listen to this person now. Like, ego, be quiet. Like, let Artemis have the floor. Let, you know what I mean? So that was a really interesting visual aid of like, I mean, like talking to yourself, but definitely reflecting on like what, who's making the decision right now? Is it me or is it my ego? Is it like Athena, or do I want Persephone to make this decision kind of situation?
That is really interesting. And even like I'm thinking about that Pixar movie with the feelings in that dude's hands,
Mm-hmm.
and that's tough to implement in real life. I think it's very powerful, but for the
Yes.
layman, it's not easy to implement, or laywoman.
Mm, yeah, no, it's very tough. I think it's, I remember initially I was very like enthralled by it and it's like I want to practice this, and it's, there's been times where I'm like I haven't even thought about it for a while, or I have to remind myself like what is really going on right now. So yeah, it's not like it's an easy thing to just start or begin or to even consistently work with, I think. But I think it's like good information to have just as a human, of just in dealing with like yourself and growing throughout the world.
I think so too. I think the information and having it visualized for you and being able to like relate that to your own life and experiences brings a lot of value to it.
Yeah, I agree. The visuals definitely help.
Sarah, there's a second poem that I would like to read
Mm-hmm.
before I ask. Let's see. 1 second. All right. Here it I'm nearly there. All right. So this is Forks. You posted this on October 1st, 2017. My life is a culmination of windy roads leading to my past homes, to the souls that I can carry in my heart wherever I go, to foreign trails I've yet to wander on. These many forks in my road no longer makes my heart beat faster than a drum, because now a sturdy street sign stands, reminding me of the limitless paths that I can choose from. Sara Stewart. Do you have any last minute words for any aspiring artists or writers, or any sort of lessons you've learned?
Um, I mean, it's super cliche, and I think it's a hard thing to listen to, but it is kind of as simple as like you just gotta like do your art. Um, but what I've learned is that I need to create space for myself to do that art, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental. So it's like giving myself the time, but also giving myself the energy to do that. So even if I were to like set aside like every Sunday morning, I'm gonna write, but then I wake up Sunday and like I haven't done my laundry in a week. I haven't like, I need to go to the grocery store. I need to clean my house kind of deal. So it's like that doesn't help you in creating that space or giving yourself the energy to implement like making your art or your writing a priority. So I definitely think it's like that's a part of the intention, at least I have with writing. And what I've learned is I need to allow myself that time and that space and honor that time as well, with making sure that I'm like mentally and emotionally prepared or like feeling supported in myself to spend that time writing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, Sarah, and I wish you the
Thanks for
best of.
having me.
You're
This was fun
welcome.
to catch up and chat.
This was fun, and I wish you the best of luck in your future writings.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
See you.
All right. Bye, Grace.